Number 10. Savage Spider-Man. This Spider-Man hails from Savage Land. When he was just a child, he and his parents flew over Savage Land when their plane exploded. Although his parents were killed, young Peter Parker survived. He landed in a nest of giant spiders who raised him as their own, building up his immunity to their spider venom by biting him. That's what happened. Peter Parkerman would grow up to become Savage Spider-Man, a guardian of the Savage Land, who would later be recruited to join the multiversal Spider Army in the fight against the Inheritors. Savage Spider-Man has his origins explained and was first introduced in Vault of Spiders issue number 1. Vault of Spiders. Number 9. The Other Old Man Spider-Man. The other one. We've already talked about the senile old Spider-Man who basically goes insane in his old age and is severely depressed due to the city being overrun with corrupt politicians and criminals and due to losing Mary Jane and how that happened or why that happened. But we haven't yet talked about the old, seemingly immortal Spider-Man from Earth 18236. This version of the character is so old he doesn't even remember how long he's lived in the retirement home he now finds himself in. His life was extended after he received a blood transfusion from Deadpool, and in this alternate reality he is confined to a wheelchair while remaining impressively dexterous and strong. The old man Deadpool of this reality ends up in the same retirement home and the two team up together. I don't know about you, but I think a reality where Spider-Man is forced to team up with Deadpool, possibly forever because he can now live so long, is a pretty dark one, at least from Peter's perspective. You can find this version of Spider-Man and this version of Deadpool in their team-up series Spider-Man/Deadpool in issue 26. And friends, before we move on to the next spot, just a quick reminder to click like, click, and do the other things too, like comment, subscribe, you know, all the things. Thank you. Number 8. Web Slinger. The Web Slinger is an alternate version of Spider-Man who was first introduced in Amazing Spider-Man in 2014 in issue number 9, but we later learn more of his origins in Vault of Spiders issue number 1. Here we discover how Patrick O'Hara and his horse Widow got their spider-like abilities. A spider that had become exposed to an elixir bit both of them one day, granting them miraculous abilities. This elixir had been made by Patrick's colleague Dr. Michael Morbius, who made and sold elixirs and participated in a traveling show along with the gunslinger. However, Morbius was transformed into a vampire when he himself consumed the elixir and began to feed on human children. Patrick was forced to confront Morbius, who sacrificed himself in a laboratory explosion, rushing towards it instead of away to make sure that the people would be safe from him forever. Tragic. Number 7. Mayhem. Mayhem is an alternate version of another alternate version of Spider-Man. It's a lot of alternates on alternates. The alternate version they're an alternate of is Spider-Girl of the Earth 982 reality, aka MC2. Mayhem is April Parker, the clone of May Parker, Spider-Man and Mary Jane's daughter. April was initially antagonistic when she awoke from her stasis, but was soon after brought around to the side of good and even integrated into the Parker family, becoming like a sister to May and taking the name April. At school, May explained their identical appearance by saying April was her cousin. However, April would eventually turn to the dark side once more, taking up the mantle Mayhem, after becoming jealous of May. April believed there could only be one Spider-Woman. Number 6. Spiders-Man, Earth X. Spiders-Man of Earth X is different from the Spiders-Man we talked about in part 3 of this series, who hailed from the Earth 11580. Spiders-Man of Earth X, or the reality of Earth 9997, is a villain who ended up joining the Skull, and used his abilities to torment the Skull's prisoners. We don't know what his life was like before, we merely know that a mutation likely caused him to turn into a lizard-like being whose skin looks similar to the pattern of Spider-Man's suit. He has illusion casting powers which allow him to cast energy webs that cause very realistic illusions, making his victims relive the most tragic moment of their lives. Number 5. Ultimatum. Miles Morales of Earth 1610 has not been integrated into the 616 world, and because of that and because of his awesomeness, we often associate him with the main continuity, but he isn't the actual Miles of Earth 616. We have one of those, as a matter of fact, who is in fact not a hero, but instead a criminal who once worked for the Kingpin. He ended up being sent to the reality of Earth 1610, but made his way back to Earth 616 eventually. Returning, he now had knowledge of the lives people had lived in 1610 before the world was reformed as Battleworld, and then was later deconstructed and returned to normal by Reed Richards. His plan was to get rid of Miles and his family, sending them back to their home reality. However, it didn't really work out when he put it into action. Still, Ultimatum could be waiting for the right moment to strike again, and also boasts of having the immensely powerful Green Goblin of Earth 1610 at his beck and call, who also came along with him to Earth 616. Number 4. The Lizard. The Lizard was originally Peter Parker in the reality of Earth 65. Peter was a friend of Gwen's and wanted nothing more than to be just like his favorite hero, Spider-Woman. He worked on a serum that would help him to become like her and also help him to stand up to the students who mistreated him, which Gwen often did for Peter whenever she noticed that he was being teased. Unfortunately, the serum did not work as Peter expected and turned him into the monster and villain known as the Lizard. A monster which Gwen, as Spider-Woman, was forced to kill, only to find out after that all along it had been her friend Peter, who'd simply turned himself into the Lizard in the first place because he wanted to be like her. Oh my goodness. It's a pretty tragic story just all around. For Gwen, for Peter, ugh. Number 3. Venom. This version of Spider-Man comes to us from what we're referring to temporarily as Earth 848. That's a temporal reality number though, so don't get too attached to it because it's probably gonna change. As implied by the name of this point, he is from the What If inspired series Spider-Man Spider's Shadow, where we imagine what would have happened if Peter hadn't decided to part ways with the symbiotic black suit we've come to know as Venom, but instead decided to stay bonded to it, basically becoming Venom. Here, Spider-Man becomes a merciless anti-hero slash villain who kills his enemies, and the Sinister Six must band together in order to try and survive. Well, a version of the Sinister Six at least. He also sports a pretty sweet beard here. Beards make you dark and edgy, right? I don't know, I've never had one, so let me know. Number 2. Black Suit Mr. Fantastic. If you thought Peter Parker keeping the black suit was a bad idea, wait till you see who else gets their hands on it on Earth TRN 848 in Spider-Man Spider's Shadow. None other than Mr. Fantastic of the Fantastic Four. Well, he isn't really intending to get his hands on it, it's more like it gets its tendrils on him after blaming Reed for causing Peter to leave it. The black symbiote suit then forcefully bonds to Reed and takes control of his brilliant mind, using it to extract its own offspring. So it's likely only going to get a lot more dark in this series before it gets any brighter. If it gets any brighter. I guess we'll see what Chip Zdarsky has in store for us. Number 1. Carnage. While we might know Aunt May's alternate spider totem persona as a hero, the one who hails from the reality of Earth 3123, Spider-Man, she also has her own dark spider alternate. We made this version of May Riley who goes by the mantle Carnage in Spider-Verse issue number 2 out of 2019. Here Spider-Man finds herself attacked by her dark alternate, Carnage, who comes through a portal into Ma'am's reality, and hails herself from Earth 20143. This version of Aunt May is instead bonded with the Carnage symbiote and believes firmly in spreading chaos and death throughout the multiverse. It takes May working in tandem with all her good counterparts across the multiverse to fight back this villainous version of herself, an alternate spider person.
Number 10. Spider-Man Earth 10,011. Starting off with a pretty dark one hailing from the Cancerverse. Now, what is the Cancerverse, you ask? Well, on Earth 10,011, life finally defeated death, and for some reason with such a surplus of life being fueled by the many angled ones, this caused every living thing on Earth to be corrupted and basically turned into living corpses that will do their bidding. Now, it's a really interesting story, so check it out for yourself in 2010's Realm of Kings number 1, but anyways, let's get back to the Spider-Man. She is one of the grotesque creatures we see go head to head with the Cosmic Avengers when they attack Sanctuary 2. Now, we don't get to know her for very long since she is beaten to death by Ronan the Accuser shortly after her introduction, but from what we can see, I can understand why you wouldn't want her around for too long. Possessing all of the proportionate powers of a spider such as enhanced strength, speed, stamina, and reflexes, this Spider-Man also possesses spider-like fangs, arms, and a lower half which they bring to the table, basically making them the spider equivalent of a centaur. So yeah, I really wouldn't want that charging at me at full speed. Check her out for yourself in her first and last appearance in 2010's Thanos Imperative number 4. Number 9. Webman. Now, another one-off Spidey variant with not the most clever name in my opinion, but hey, who am I to judge? Webman is basically Spider-Man's evil mirror twin introduced to us when Spider-Man entered a room through a window and started looking at his reflection in a mirror. Now, what he didn't realize is that it was actually a one-way mirror, and on the other side was Dr. Doom, who jumped at the chance to use his twin machine to create a copy of Spider-Man. With all the powers of our friendly neighborhood hero, you would assume that this evil clone would be a formidable foe. However, he was created with the opposite traits of Peter, meaning he was actually quite stupid, and was not able to complete the task given to him by Dr. Doom. Realizing this, Doom attempts to create another clone of Peter, but his twin machine is destroyed before he could complete the task, and this led to his arrest. Now, it's actually unknown where Webman ended up. He could actually still be out there somewhere, probably trying to find his way out of a wet paper bag or something, I don't know. Either way, why not check out Webman for yourself in his first and supposedly last appearance in 1977's Spidey Super Stories number 25. Number 8, Blood Spider. Alongside Joe Emberlin, aka Jagged Bow, and Timothy Carlskin, aka Death Shield, Michael Bingham was taken under Taskmaster's wing and trained to mimic Spider-Man in order to one day kill him. Although Michael possesses somewhat primitive tech compared to Peter, such as his web shooters that are attached to a backpack-like fluid holder, he is still not someone you want to mess with. Since he was handpicked by the Taskmaster to be Spider-Man's match, he was trained in the fighting style of Spider-Man, and it can be assumed that his powers were a close match to those of Spider-Man himself before he was even picked. Now, not a whole lot is known about how he obtained his powers, but Blood Spider has demonstrated superhuman reflexes and strength in many fights over the years. He's able to smash his fist into a wall without flinching, dodge bullets, and he has the ability to cling to walls like our wise-cracking webhead, but it's not known if that is through artificial or natural means. Created by Jerry Bingham and also named after him, take a look at his character for yourself, starting with his first appearance in 1992's Amazing Spider-Man number 367. Number 7, Scarlet Spider. The Jackal's first attempt at cloning Peter Parker, Kane Parker was initially thought to be a success, but later degenerated and became mentally unstable. Discarded by the Jackal but allowed to live, Kane left and soon realized that his degeneration had actually amplified his powers and made him stronger than Peter. Able to lift up to approximately 60 tons, Kane also outclasses Peter with his super speed, stamina, and Mark of Kane, which is an ability he has that allows him to severely burn someone through skin-to-skin contact. Kane's major introduction into the Spidey world was during the Clone Saga, where he was tricked into believing the real Peter Parker was actually the clone, and he was determined to eliminate Ben Reilly, the actual clone, so his quote-unquote clone could live the life he wasn't able to have thanks to the degeneration of his body and mind. Now that's all I'm going to say about the storyline because he does have to do some pretty twisted things, and I genuinely think you guys should all read it for yourselves. Since then, Kane has toned down his evil intentions and has used his powers for good, going as far as dying during the fight with Deimos as a member of the Spider Army, but that didn't last for too long because he does eventually come back to life. Now obviously there is so much more I could talk about when it comes to this character. He is such a great one and there are so many layers to him. It was so difficult to condense it all down. So if you want to know more, let me know in the comments below and maybe we'll dedicate an entire video to Kane Parker. But for now though, check him out in his first appearance in 1994's Web of Spider-Man number 119. Number 6, Spider Carnage. Just so you all know, I'm going to be talking about the Spider Carnage that we see in 1998's Spider-Wars arc in the Spider-Man animated series. Ben Reilly, also known as Scarlet Spider, but not to be confused with Kane Parker, was a successfully cloned Spider-Man created by Miles Warren. Hating that there was a double of him out there, Ben bonded with the Carnage symbiote, creating the terrifying and powerful creature known as Spider Carnage. With all the powers and abilities of both Spider-Man and Carnage, Ben devastated New York and intended to wipe out pretty much all of reality, but thankfully he was somewhat stopped by the Spider-Man of different realities. Traveling to another dimension to try and unfold his plan there, he gains the support of that world's Kingpin, but is eventually attacked by one of the various Spider-Men once again. Our friendly Spidey realizes somehow that Ben is not truly evil, he's just confused and hurt since both his Aunt May and Uncle Ben are gone. So he enlists the help of Earth's 31,198's Uncle Ben, who is able to appeal to the Peter within and calm down the beast. This unfortunately was not enough to unbind him from the symbiote though, and Ben Reilly decided to jump into an unbalanced portal, ultimately vaporizing both him and the symbiote. Now even though this is an older storyline from the show, I highly recommend you check it out for yourself because it still holds up, trust me. So check out season 5, episode 12 and 13 of Spider-Man the Animated Series. Number 5, Poison. Peter Parker from Earth 70,134 has a similar history to his 616 counterpart up until his second battle with Morlun. And now hanging from a cocoon under the Brooklyn Bridge, he is offered the chance to be reborn by the other. However, he actually rejected the power by ripping off its head and killing it. This was a pretty bad idea because this left his metamorphosis / resurrection incomplete. Lucky for him though, the Venom symbiote sensed this somehow and left Mac Gargan to merge with Peter. Although he fought against the symbiote for months on end, Peter eventually succumbed to it and allowed it to destroy his psyche and completely take over. Believing that his new form was a gift that should be shared, he tried to have it bond with Mary Jane, who obviously refused, and soon after both Wolverine and Luke Cage attempted to take him down, but failed because Poison is way too strong. He literally has all the powers of Peter Parker and Venom. Skip ahead a little bit and we see him try to convince MJ once again to accept his quote-unquote gift, and she says no again for obvious reasons and somehow convinces him to leave. So even though Peter had completely lost himself to the symbiote, he still showed some self-restraint, making him not the worst dark alternate, I guess. Yet another one-off dark Spidey. Check out this Earth's Peter for yourself in 2007's What If Spider-Man the Other number 1. Number 4, Spiders Man. Yep, you heard me right, Spiders-Man. Once a promising young student at Horizon University, Peter of Earth 11,580 gained his powers after he fell into a massive colony of genetically altered spiders. Assumed to be dead because it looked like the spiders completely devoured him, in reality the spiders had actually just absorbed his consciousness and started to act as a single hive mind, dubbing itself Spiders-Man. The name kind of makes sense now, right? Yeah. This Peter played a decent role in the Spider-Geddon storyline, as both he and Spider-Norman are recruited into the superior spider army and both decide to eventually leave the group. They end up being teleported to the Web of Life and Destiny, and while Spiders-Man is feasting on Carnes' corpse, Norman decides to destroy the web, but not before Spiders-Man sends a bunch of his spiders across the multiverse to spy on all the other Spideys out there. With powers similar to Carl King, aka the Thousand, this creepy crawly alternate Spider-Man is not one that I would want to go toe to toe with. Having first appeared in 2019 Spider-Geddon number 3, why not check him out for yourself and let me know what you think of him in the comments below. Number 3, we have Masked Marvel. In 2018's What If The Punisher number 1, we are given a glimpse of what it would be like if Peter Parker was Spider-Man, but also the Punisher. Peter of this Earth, or 71,928, has a pretty much identical origin story to his 616 counterpart, until he decided to kill the burglar that killed his Uncle Ben rather than leave his fate in the hands of the police. From that point on, he decided that as Spider-Man, he would do anything necessary when it came to fighting crime, even keeping the gun that killed his Uncle Ben on him at all times, as a reminder of what had been taken from him and what he had to do to keep everyone in his life safe. With all the same powers of our familiar 616 webhead, this Spidey fights crime under the name of the Masked Marvel. Although he tried to avoid using the gun at all costs, this Peter had no issue pulling it out and killing someone if it was for the greater good. An excellent example of this is when the Sinister Six kidnapped his Aunt May and Betty Brant, and he had no other choice but to engineer weapons specifically designed to take out each member of the Six. Now eventually Peter meets Gwen Stacy and falls in love, and she ends up getting kidnapped by the Green Goblin, which once again forces him to create a weapon specifically designed to kill the villain. After this though, he actually retires his suit, reveals his identity to Gwen, and they get married and live a very peaceful life together. Kind of a nice way to end, don't you think? Why not give his story a read for yourself and let me know what you think. Number 2, Brian Cornfield. Born and raised in New York City of Earth 616, Brian Cornfield was a huge Spider-Man fan and wanted nothing more than to get in contact with him. However, after his mother was mugged and killed, his motives changed and he wanted revenge on not only the killer, but Spider-Man for not saving her. After coming in contact with Dwarf, he was granted powers similar to Spider-Man and became Spider-X. What sets him apart from our regular old Spider-Man is that Brian is not very easy on the eyes, as he possesses 4 extra spider-like limbs coming out of his waist and upper back. And he also has razor-sharp fangs capable of tearing someone to shreds. After hunting down and killing his mother's killer, he began taking out as many criminals as possible because he truly believed he was created to bring justice to the world. Fast forward a little bit and we see Spider-X fighting his last battle against the mutant Paralyzer, who was trying to recreate Zax, and he ended up succeeding. In the fight against Zax, all the heroes present came together and defeated the giant electrical being, but the explosion actually killed both Paralyzer and Spider-X, and unfortunately, we haven't seen either of them again since. Check out Brian Cornfield for yourself in his first and last appearance as Spider-X in 1993's Midnight Suns Unlimited number 3. And number 1, Arachnite. In the Warp World storyline that follows the life of Peter Parker, who lives in a pocket dimension where history was rewritten, we see Peter's Aunt May and Uncle Ben get murdered by the Goblin by night on their way back from the American Museum of Natural History. Critically injured, Peter gets bitten by a mystical spider and is linked to the totem energy of ancient spiders, granting him his signature Spidey powers and saving his life. However, there was a drawback. This connection shattered his mind into 4 separate personalities, and although he fought against them for most of his early life, he eventually learned to listen to them and allowed them to come through whenever they were needed. These personalities are known as the Arachnid, who is the dominant aspect of Arachnite and is the most athletic persona, the Knight, who serves as Peter's aggressive side and is what keeps his crime-fighting side motivated, CEO Peter, who serves as the confident CEO of Parker Industries, and Science Peter, who is a working scientist with a strong passion for technology. Fighting crime as a member of the Defenders alongside Soldier Supreme, Iron Hammer, and Weapon Hex, Arachnite is a true hero through and through despite going through a decent amount of hardships. Give this story a read for yourself and check out Arachnite's first appearance in 2018's Infinity Wars number 3. Coming in at number 10, we have Spider-Wolf. Now, not a whole lot is known about this version of Spider-Man or his origin other than that he hails from Earth 13,989, a universe that is a little bit more gothic and assumed to be home to a number of werewolves. Now, the Spider-Man of this universe is no exception, but you probably already guessed that based off of his appearance alone. Going by the name Spider-Wolf, he has all the normal powers you would normally associate with Spider-Man, combined with the strength and the speed of a werewolf, which, as one can imagine, would make him incredibly powerful and a little bit scary to be around. Realizing this, the villain Karn sought out to defeat Spider-Wolf before he was recruited by the heroes of the Spider-Verse, as he could have been one of the Spider Army's most powerful allies. Karn is successful in taking him out for good before moving on to the other Spider-Folk in hopes of outsmarting the Spider Army. Created by Dan Slott, this is unfortunately all we know about this version of Spider-Man. Maybe we'll see him again in the future, who knows, but why not check him out for yourself in their first and last appearance in 2015's Amazing Spider-Man Volume 3, number 11. Number 9, we have Man-Spider. Now, there have been multiple iterations of Man-Spider throughout the years, such as the one that appeared in 1982's Marvel Fanfare number 1, when Spider-Man was exposed to a machine that turned people into primitive monsters, making him the Man-Spider, or in 1971's The Amazing Spider-Man number 100, when Peter tried to cure himself of his powers, but instead mutated them further, giving him 6 arms. I want to focus on Peter Parker, who is Earth 6078, because although his story isn't dark full of murder, it is dark as in he loses what makes him the lovable hero. Now, in this iteration, Peter gains his powers in a similar manner to ours, but Aunt May dies in an accident instead of Uncle Ben. This, for some reason, leads Peter to reveal his powers to his uncle, asking him to be his showbiz manager. And needless to say, like many talented folk, Peter ended up getting a very big head and started neglecting his duties as a hero, showing off his powers for fame and profit instead, while other heroes took care of the villains. Now, this caused some serious strain on his relationship with Uncle Ben, and it eventually got to the point where they stopped talking, and Peter just sends him money now out of habit to feel less guilt. Check out this sad excuse of a Spider-Man in his first appearance in 2006's Friendly Neighborhood Spider-Man number 8. Number 8, the Imperfect Spider-Man. Coming to us from the critical flop Marvel Nemesis Rise of the Imperfects, we have Earth's 50,701's Peter Parker, and from what we see, he is basically Earth's 616 Peter Parker with a bit of a darker twist. Now, if you're not familiar with the plot of this video game from 2005, that is absolutely okay. You did not miss very much, and it was not a good game at all. In the story mode, we see Spider-Man, the Thing, Wolverine, and Elektra captured and injected with a drug developed by an alien scientist that corrupted them and turned them into bloodthirsty killers. The now brutally violent and eager to fight heroes face off against each other in a Coliseum-type battle. Thankfully, it didn't last long before Spider-Man was able to fight the drug and escape, leading the fight against a group called the Imperfects that had been infected with the same drug. Now, obviously they come out on top because it would make for a pretty terrible story if they didn't. Although this game was a massive flop, it did spin off into a very interesting series called Marvel Nemesis, The Imperfects, and within 6 issues they did a better job of explaining exactly what happened in that universe. So if you're curious, check out this limited run for yourself, or honestly, if you're a fan of bad video games and you still have a GameCube lying around, maybe try and find the game. Number 7, Spider-Cyborg. On the apocalyptic Earth 2818, operating in the year 2099 AD, we have a slightly darker version of Peter Parker who, alongside his spider abilities, gains some cybernetic enhancements as well. Equipped with cybernetics covering most of his body, giving him stronger legs, metallic claws, enhanced vision, and even a sonic cannon for an arm, this Spider-Man does not come to play. Essentially, Spider-Cyborg was the perfect combination of Marvel Spider-Man and DC Cyborg, making him into one of the most powerful heroes in the Spider-Verse. Now, unfortunately, like many of the other strong alternate Spider-Men, Spider-Cyborg was immediately targeted by the villain Karn due to the threat that he posed. However, the superior Spider-Man appeared just in the nick of time and defeated the villain. Joining forces with the superior Spider Army, Spider-Cyborg attempts to defeat Karn alongside the other Spider heroes, but is eventually destroyed by Deimos when the Inheritors invaded their home base on Earth 928. Now, that's all we know about this Peter Parker, which is kind of disappointing because he definitely has a badass backstory, otherwise he wouldn't have so many cybernetic enhancements. If you know anything more about this character, well, let me know in the comments below, but in the meantime, why not check out his first appearance in 2014 Superior Spider-Man number 33. Number 6, Spider-Side. Believing himself to be the real Peter Parker, this Spidey clone was specifically engineered by the Jackal to kill the real Peter Parker, Ben, Kane, and Mary Jane. As a clone, he possesses many of the same abilities the real Peter has, such as superhuman strength, speed, and wall crawling, and spider senses, but what really sets him apart is his complete control over his molecular structure. With this ability, Spider-Side is able to extend his limbs, shapeshift, control the density of his body, and so much more. He actually uses this to simulate the artificial webbing used by Spider-Man by turning parts of himself into semi-liquid and just flicking it around. Adopting the name Spidercide after the Jackal jokingly said that this Peter would commit mass Spidercide for him, he actually followed through and once released a toxin in the air that killed 2,600 people across the state of Pennsylvania. Later, McGuire removes his clone degeneration factor after he betrays the Jackal, and good thing he does because that kept him alive for a little bit longer until he eventually fell off the roof of the Daily Bugle and was put in a stasis chamber, preventing him from ever being a threat again. First appearing all the way back in 1995 as Spidercide in New Warriors number 61. Check out this clone's short run as part of the Spider family for yourself. Number 5, Peter Parker, Earth 70,237. Many years into the future, we get a glimpse into the life of a retired Spider-Man who now spends his days working in a flower shop. MJ has already passed away due to radioactivity from what I guess I'll refer to as Peter's lovin'. You probably all know what I'm talking about, and there are actually no more heroes or villains around as a new merciless police force known as the Rain control the city. J. Jonah Jameson of all people is actually the one to convince Peter to take up the mantle of Spider-Man once again to free the city from the Rain. However, this is proven to be a very difficult task, as Mayor Waters does whatever he can to stand in his way. Facing off against the elderly Sinister Six, Peter learns to conquer his demons and truly begins his triumphant return as the friendly webhead. As he is a bit older than most Spider-Men, his reflexes are a little bit rusty and he is more vulnerable to attacks despite having his superhuman durability. After an all-out battle with Rain and Venom, who turned out to be Mayor Waters' assistant, Peter comes out victorious and the world goes back to the way it should be, full of heroes and villains. This version of Peter doesn't get to enjoy the return of heroes for long as he is murdered by Deimos, having his head crushed by Mary Jane's tombstone. If you're interested, check out this alternate Spider-Man in 2007's Spider-Man Reign number 1. Number 4, Web Slinger. Originating from Earth, spelled E-U-R-T-H, there was once a young boy who was fascinated by spiders, and as a young man, he dared the journey into the mysterious Web Wood, a place filled with mysterious beings, to meet the mysterious Widow of the Web because he really just wanted to know more about spiders. Impressed by him, she used her magical abilities to give him all the powers of the Spider Kingdom with one condition attached. He could never use the powers for his own interest. Now, these powers weren't really too much to write home about considering spiders don't have too much going on for them. He really just gained extra limbs and web generating abilities. Not long after, his uncle was in trouble and the boy ended up using his powers to save him, which really angered the widow, causing her to curse the boy. From that day forward, he lived out his life as a monstrous looking spider-human hybrid. Deciding to isolate himself from society, the boy took up the name Web Slinger and became the guardian of Webwood. However, despite all the good he does as Web Slinger, he is still seen as no better than the criminals he fights due to his monstrous appearance. Give his story a read for yourself in 2000's Avatar Covenant of the Shield number 2. Number 3, we have Spider-Man Noir. Raised by his Aunt May and Uncle Ben during the Great Depression, this Peter was raised to believe that good could triumph over evil no matter what. Now, gaining his powers after an antique spider statue breaks open and he is bit by a horde of spiders, he awakens the next day with these arachnid-like abilities, such as being able to shoot organic webs from his wrists, spider senses, and of course the signature superhuman abilities of every Spider-Man. Equipped with his signature Spider-Man Noir suit modeled after his uncle's World War I airman uniform, Peter stealthily moves about in the shadows, taking down baddies with his spider powers and revolvers. This Peter is pretty interesting because in the beginning of his career, he seemed to have no problem killing villains, killing the Vulture before he could murder his Aunt May. But later on he seemed to grow conscious and instead relied more on his powers than on his firepower. As a member of the Superior Spider Army, we saw him stationed on Earth 928, and he was a fairly key member of the war until he was very badly injured by Bricks and Bora, and had to kinda sit the rest of it out and do whatever he could from behind the scenes. Outside of that storyline, we have seen him fight the likes of his Earth's Norman Osborn and the Chameleon, and we even got to see him in the animated movie Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse, where he was voiced by Nicolas Cage. Now, if you're wondering why I included him on this list today since he doesn't really have a dark attitude to the world, here's why. My reasoning is because he literally grew up during the Great Depression, one of the darkest times in human history, and had to deal with some pretty dark subject matter while fighting the urge to succumb to it. So, I highly recommend you check out Spider-Man Noir for yourself in his first appearance in 2009's Spider-Man Noir number 1. Coming in at number 2, we have Last Stand Spider-Man. Now, this version of Spider-Man is a possible future Peter Parker that we get to see thanks to Madam Web. In this future, Peter kills Kraven the Hunter to avenge the deaths of Kane and Mattie Franklin, and this sort of flips some switch in Peter because from that point on, he was much darker and deadlier. Adopting a new costume and title as an anti-hero, this version of Spider-Man is kicked out of the Avengers for good and winds up hurting his loved ones so badly, leaving him all alone with no one to worry about. All of his quote-unquote heroic deeds do eventually catch the attention of the police, and he goes on the run as a fugitive. Years later, as an old man, Peter visited his Aunt May's grave, aware that his younger self was actually hiding in the shadows watching his every move. Peter was confronted by the NYPD, and though he was given the choice to surrender and admit to his crimes, he refused and fought against them until he was shot down and killed. Now, I know we've talked about darker versions of Peter that are okay with killing and whatnot, but what sets Last Stand apart is that he seems he eventually realized what he was doing was probably not the best, and he felt the only way to atone for his sins was to actually die. Now, I highly recommend you check the story out for yourself because it is a great read, so head on over to 2003's Amazing Spider-Man Volume 2, number 58. And finally, number 1, we have Peter Parker, Earth 8351. Known as Assassin Spider-Man, this universe's Peter Parker becomes an assassin working alongside Wolverine, leaving basically all aspects of his old life behind, including his longtime girlfriend Mary Jane. This Spider-Man is the complete inverse of his 616 counterpart. We later find out during the events of Edge of the Spider-Verse that Peter left his old life behind to protect his loved ones, as he states that with great power comes great responsibility and even greater enemies. Shown to be always serious, lacking his signature quips and jokey demeanor in battle, likely because he has no problem coping with the situation like his mainstream counterpart, this Spidey has shown no qualms about killing and does whatever it takes to get the job done. Now, this is likely due to his friendship with Wolverine, having adapted to his personality to better fit their job style. Having received formal training to hone his skills, this Peter possesses highly refined versions of the Spidey powers we all know and love. The most impressive being his spider senses, which is honed so much that he just seems to know things, even to the point that he knows what's going on before his opponent could think about it. So, beating him is nearly impossible to do thanks to this precognition. He's also a master at hand-to-hand combat, able to defeat Black Widow with ease, and a master marksman, able to use any gun he gets his hands on. Added as a member of the Superior Spider-Man's Superior Spider Army, he alongside the other Spider-Men of the multiverse take on Karn. However, he is unfortunately defeated by the likes of Deimos' clone. Appearing for the first time in 2008's What If Spider-Man vs. Wolverine number 1, why not check this cold webhead out for yourself? Number 10, Symbiote Spider-Man. Obviously, we have to start off this list with a classic. Introduced in 1989's What If Volume 2 number 4, we're given a glimpse into the life of Earth 1089's Peter Parker after his suit bonded with the Venom symbiote. In this reality, the symbiote couldn't be removed from Peter Parker, even though the Fantastic Four and other heroes tried using a combination of magic and science. It ended up taking over Peter's mind and body, feeding off his adrenaline, causing him to age at a very rapid rate. Once his body couldn't sustain the symbiote any longer, it used him to possess superheroes like Hulk and even caused the death of a few others. Free from the symbiote's control, it's then revealed that Peter Parker has now aged to 85 with not a whole lot of time left. He was later found dead by Mr. Fantastic, surrounded by research on how to kill the symbiote that he was once bonded to. Although it was out of his control, Symbiote Spider-Man was considered even worse than Venom, one of the most sadistic villains in the Marvel Universe, and unfortunately he never really got that redemption. Number 9, Peter Parker, Earth 9591. Now, we're all familiar with the origin story of Peter Parker. Spider bite leads to powers, leads to the birth of the friendly neighborhood Spider-Man. But have you ever wondered what it would look like if things took a bit of a different turn after that spider bite? Well, wonder no longer, because the 1995's Ruin number 2, we're actually introduced to a different Peter Parker who isn't so lucky. After being bitten by the radioactive spider, Peter develops a total of 0 powers and is instead infected with a mutant virus that ultimately leads to his death. This Earth never gets the chance to meet the hero Spider-Man, and instead they're given a rash and scar-covered Peter Parker who was forced to live the remainder of his life in quarantine so he wouldn't infect anyone else. I always wondered what would happen realistically after that spider bite, but man, I really didn't think it would be that dark. Number 8, Ghost Spider. Now, this is one of my favorite costumes in the Spider-Man PS4 game, so I had to add it to the list. On Earth 11,638, Peter's Uncle Ben wasn't ever murdered and actually helped him hone his skills as the Amazing Spider. Despite this, he doesn't always use his abilities and intellect for good, and thanks to the resources from his lab, Parker Technologies, the Amazing Spider found a way to bring over other Spider-Men from different universes and absorb their powers. After bringing Earth 616 Peter Parker into his universe, the Spider is convinced by him that what he's been doing isn't heroic at all. Then, when Ben is about to absorb Earth 616 Peter's powers, we see the Spider stand in the way and instead had his powers absorbed, putting his body into a comatose state and trapping his spirit in hell. Following the Sorcerer Supreme's fight with the Infernal Hulk, we see Peter given a second chance at life after he was infused with the spirits and powers of the repentant damned. Now possessing powers similar to Ghost Rider along with his Spidey powers, he awakes from his coma as the Ghost Spider and uses his second chance to correct some of the mistakes he's made already. Check him out in his first appearance in 2011's Amazing Spider-Man Annual number 38. Number 7. Superior Spider-Man. Following an insane life that deserves a read if you're not familiar with it already, Otto Octavius transplanted his mind into the body of Peter Parker, leaving Peter in his body. Still retaining Peter's memories, he was able to trick all of Peter's loved ones into thinking nothing was wrong. Otto believed that he could be a better Spider-Man and, following the death of Peter Parker, took up the role as the Superior Spider-Man, upgrading the spider suit to better fit his needs. Many battles ensued, and then it's revealed along the way that Peter's consciousness still lived on inside his body, and after the Goblin King kidnapped Anna Maria, Otto's love interest while in Peter's body, Otto begins to hesitate to save others as he has a chance to save her and doubts he can save everyone without having time to plan. Peter's consciousness pushes him to save the child who is also in danger at the same time, and Otto realizes that Peter is more deserving of the role of Spider-Man and completely erases his consciousness so that Peter can take control of his body once more and save everyone. He sacrificed himself for the girl he loved and the man he hated for the greater good, and that just goes to show you that even if you start off as a villain, you can change and become a hero. Now there's a lot more to the story that I had to gloss over or skip, so I highly recommend you check out the story for yourself, starting with The Amazing Spider-Man number 697. Number 6. Doppelganger. The evil, pretty much mindless duplicate of Spider-Man from Earth 616, this version of Spider-Man was created by Magus during the Infinity War. Although he was killed during the Infinity War, this 6-armed Spidey clone was later revived by the Demogoblin, becoming its pet for a while. Doppelganger appears a few more times after the aftermath of the Infinity War, teaming up with Carnage, Shriek, Carrion, and the Demogoblin during the infamous Maximum Carnage killing spree, and then is later seen as part of the Spider Army to help defeat Morlun and the other inheritors. Unfortunately for him, after many adventures, the Doppelganger was eventually captured and imprisoned in the rebuilt Ravencroft. Possessing many of the same powers as the original Spider-Man, what really sets Doppelganger apart is his raw strength. Being able to lift up to 25 tons as opposed to the normal 10 that most other Spider heroes can lift. Why not check him out for yourself in Infinity War number 1. Number 5. Pestilence. In 2005's Cable and Deadpool number 15, we see Deadpool dropped in Earth 5701, while on a search for Cable where the supervillain Apocalypse has conquered New York and then changed 4 superheroes into his horsemen, one being the Spider-Man of this world. Alongside Famine, who's the Blob, Death, who is Archangel, and an alternate Cable known as War, they all serve under Apocalypse and aim to protect him at all costs. Now known as Pestilence, this 4-armed and 4-legged version of Spider-Man is not one you want to get close to, especially when you learn about his poisonous fangs and his hunger for human bones. Check him out for yourself and let me know what you think in the comments below. Number 4. The Other. In the 2005-2006 storyline of the same title, we see Spider-Man begin a transformation to his wild side. Peter began having these strange symptoms and dreams of Uncle Ben and spiders. Thinking he might be dying, Peter threw himself more and more into his crime fighting, especially against the scientific vampire known as Morlun, as Morlun wreaked havoc by beating Spider-Man so badly that he ended up in the hospital, and also by smacking Mary Jane around. Peter got to the point where he just couldn't take it anymore and reached his limits. In 2006 Friendly Neighborhood Spider-Man number 3, we see Spider-Man pin Morlun down and kill him with a bite to the head. After what we all assume was Peter's death, we see Peter erupt from a cocoon with new powers and a newfound dedication to embracing his spider side that he refers to as the Other. Even though he embraced his dark side for a while, he does eventually come back to his senses and becomes the Friendly Neighborhood Spider-Man once more. Number 3. Patton Parnell. Definitely one of the scariest looking Spider-Men, Patton Parnell has been described as a sociopathic version of Spider-Man who made the exact opposite decisions that Peter had. Growing up with an abusive uncle, Uncle Ted, Parnell was always a bit of a weird one as he found joy in experimenting on animals and perversely spying on his next door neighbor Sarah Jane. Like other Spider-Men, Patton was bit by a spider, however, his body's reaction to it was a little bit different. Instead of turning into a superhero, he actually gained the ability to turn into a spider-like monster and started to seek revenge on those who had treated him poorly, starting with his uncle. He eventually leads Sarah Jane to his house and reveals his new form to her, and needless to say, she was terrified and not at all impressed. And then after a bite to the neck, the next morning we see hundreds of baby spiders coming out of Sarah Jane's neck. Thankfully, Parnell doesn't stick around for too long, as just after 3 days of having his power, he is drained of all his life force by Morlun. Check out this twisted story in 2014's Edge of Spider-Verse number 4. Number 2. The Spider. Showcased in the Exile series, we're introduced to one of the darkest Spider-Men to date. On Earth 15, Peter Parker was a sociopathic mass murderer who was sentenced to 67 consecutive life sentences and merged with the Carnage symbiote before being recruited by the Timebreakers into the Weapon X team. Using none of his powers for good, the Spider joined the other members of the team to try to conquer the Earth instead of actually helping them. finding nothing but joy in killing and torturing. It took a blast from Firestar to end his reign of terror alongside the other rebels. What makes this version of Spider-Man so terrifying is that he's one of the few Spideys who actually keeps the symbiote his entire career. With the symbiote's powers combined with Peter's evil rage, this puts the Spider at the same power level as Carnage at his strongest point, making him a truly frightening foe. Why not check him out for yourself in 2002's Exiles number 12 so you can see just how truly merciless this killer is. Number 1. Zombie Spider-Man. Now, not a whole lot is known about Earth 2149 Peter Parker's life before the zombie apocalypse, but it's presumed that it was similar to his 616 counterpart. On his search for the Necronomicon, the presumed source of the zombie infection, Peter ends up getting bit by Colonel America, who is a zombie at the time, and becomes infected. With his mind still relatively human, he hurries home to try and get his Aunt May and Mary Jane to safety. However, with the virus spreading quickly through his body, he winds up killing and eating them both. Alongside the other superpowered zombies, they ate almost all life on Earth until they ate Galactus, which granted them all the powers of the Power Cosmic, which they used to travel the universe, eating other worlds in their endless search for more food. After 40 years of eating worlds, they finally returned to Earth, still hungry to find Reed Richards' dimensional portal so they could finally continue their quest. However, Spidey noticed that his hunger was completely gone. Regaining his sense of justice, Spidey alongside some other good zombies found themselves locked in a battle with the other zombie heroes, trying their very hardest to convince them that their hunger was also gone and they could become heroes once again. Now, there is a whole lot more to the story of Spider-Man, and I could honestly talk about it for hours. This entire zombie universe is amazing. So if you're interested in hearing the rest of the Spidey's redemption story, why not let me know in the comments below and maybe we'll dedicate an entire video to it. If you want to read the story for yourself, why not check it out in Ultimate Fantastic Four number 22 and Marvel Zombies vs. Army of Darkness number 1.